The excitement was building in the small town as Tom's wedding day finally arrived. Everyone had been talking about it for months, how beautiful the ceremony would be, how stunning the bride, Emily, would look, and how happy Tom was to be marrying the woman of his dreams. His mother, Linda, was especially involved in the preparations. She had spent hours organizing everything, from the flowers to the decorations, making sure that every detail was perfect for her son. She could already picture the smile on Tom's face as he said his vows and started a new chapter of his life. Linda had always dreamed of this moment, her son, all grown up and starting his own family. She had raised Tom to be kind, thoughtful, and respectful, and she had always been proud of the man he had become. When Tom introduced Emily to the family, Linda had hoped that the young woman would be the one for him. Emily was lovely, smart, friendly, and seemed to fit perfectly into their lives. Linda couldn't help but notice how Emily seemed to get along with everyone, how easily she made friends with family members and strangers alike. But today, as Linda stood in the back of the church, overseeing the final preparations, she felt an odd feeling in the pit of her stomach. The decorations were beautiful, the guests were all seated, and Tom stood waiting at the altar, a smile on his face that Linda knew so well. Yet, something felt off. It wasn't that Linda didn't like Emily. She had always been warm and welcoming to her, but there was something about the way Emily was carrying herself today that made Linda uneasy. Perhaps it was the way Emily was smiling too brightly, or the way she kept glancing around nervously. Linda had never seen her act like this before, and it made her wonder if something was wrong. As the ceremony began, Linda's eyes kept darting back to Emily, who looked stunning in her wedding gown. She was every bit the picture-perfect bride, and Tom looked overjoyed. Yet, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that there was something hidden beneath the surface, something she wasn't seeing. She tried to push the feeling away, telling herself that it was just pre-wedding nerves. But as Emily walked down the aisle, Linda couldn't ignore the nagging thought that something was amiss. Linda had always trusted her instincts, and they had never steered her wrong before. She watched as Emily took her place beside Tom, and for the first time, Linda started to doubt her initial impression of the young woman. She remembered the way Emily had always been so perfect, so put together, but today there was something different about her. It was subtle, like a shadow that lingered just out of reach, but it was enough to make Linda's heart skip a beat. As the priest began to speak, Linda felt a sense of foreboding wash over her. She couldn't explain it, but something about Emily didn't sit right today. Was it just nerves? Or was there something deeper going on? Linda didn't know, but one thing was clear. She couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. And as the ceremony continued, Linda's mind raced, trying to figure out what was going on with the woman who was about to marry her son. She had to know the truth, whatever it was. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about her son's future, and Linda. As the ceremony continued, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She tried to focus on the joyful occasion. Her son was about to marry the woman he loved, but her eyes kept drifting back to Emily. The young woman stood beside Tom, her expression calm and composed, but Linda's instincts told her something was off. It wasn't the way Emily looked. She was still the same lovely bride, glowing in her white dress, her hair perfectly styled. But Linda couldn't help but notice how her smile seemed a little too forced, her eyes flickering around the room, never quite meeting anyone's gaze for too long. Linda tried to ignore the feeling, thinking it was just nerves. After all, this was a huge day for Emily too. Maybe she was just feeling overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. But as Linda watched, the unease only grew stronger. Emily kept fiddling with the lace on her dress, her hands trembling ever so slightly. It was subtle, but Linda saw it. She knew Emily well enough to tell that something wasn't right. The priest's voice echoed in the church, and the couple exchanged their vows. Tom looked at Emily with such love and devotion, his voice steady and filled with emotion as he promised to stand by her through everything. Emily, however, hesitated for just a moment before speaking her vows, her voice wavering as if she was trying to hold back tears. It was so slight, no one else might have noticed, but Linda saw it clearly. She watched as Emily looked down at her hands, avoiding Tom's eyes. Was it guilt? Was she hiding something? Linda couldn't understand, but she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in her chest. As the ceremony went on, Linda's mind raced. She couldn't help but wonder what could be causing Emily to act so strange. Was she second-guessing the wedding? Was there something about Tom she didn't know? Linda had always trusted her son's judgment, but now she couldn't help but question everything. What if Emily wasn't the person Tom thought she was? As the priest continued with the ceremony, Linda's thoughts wandered back to the past. She remembered the first time she met Emily, how Tom had introduced her with such pride, eager to show his mother the woman he wanted to spend his life with. At first, Linda had been impressed. Emily seemed perfect, charming, and kind. They had spent hours talking, and Linda had quickly warmed to her. But now, standing in front of her, Emily felt different. Linda couldn't explain it, but the confidence Emily had once displayed was gone. In its place was a woman who seemed anxious, uncertain, and strangely distant. Linda tried to tell herself that she was being overly cautious, that maybe it was just wedding jitters. But every time she looked at Emily, her heart raced. Something was wrong. She didn't know what, but she had to find out. She had to know the truth. This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about her son's happiness, his future. Linda would do whatever it took to protect him, even if it meant confronting the uncomfortable truth about the woman he was about to marry. And as the ceremony continued, Linda's resolve grew stronger. She couldn't let this moment pass without finding out what was really going on with Emily. As Linda sat in her seat, watching the ceremony unfold before her, her mind couldn't help but wander back to when she first met Emily. She remembered the excitement in Tom's voice as he introduced her to the woman he had fallen in love with. Tom had always been a bit of a romantic, always searching for the one. And when he told Linda about Emily, she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. After all, Tom had been through a few relationships that hadn't worked out, and this time, it seemed like he had found someone who truly made him happy. Emily was charming, beautiful, and had a warmth about her that made everyone feel comfortable. Linda had hoped that this was the one, the woman who would make her son's dreams come true. When they first met, Emily had been everything Linda could have wanted for her son. She had a quiet confidence about her, and she was easy to talk to. Linda could see that Tom was completely smitten with her. They would spend hours together, and Emily never seemed to tire of listening to Tom's stories. The way Emily would laugh at Tom's jokes, the way she would gently touch his arm during their conversations. It was clear to Linda that they were a perfect match. But as time went on, Linda started to notice a few things that made her uneasy, even though she didn't want to admit it. Emily had a tendency to always appear perfect. Her clothes were always pristine, her hair always styled, and her words were always carefully chosen. Linda remembered one conversation where Emily seemed a little too eager to impress her, talking about all of her achievements, making sure to mention how accomplished she was in her career. Linda hadn't thought much of it at the time, thinking that maybe Emily was just trying to make a good impression. But now, as she watched the woman stand beside her son, Linda couldn't ignore the feeling that something was off. Looking back, Linda wondered if she had missed warning signs earlier. She remembered how Emily always seemed to avoid talking about her past. Whenever Linda asked about Emily's family or her childhood, Emily would either change the subject or offer vague answers. At the time, Linda had chalked it up to Emily simply being a private person. But now, those small details seemed like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit. Linda couldn't shake the feeling that Emily had been hiding something. As she watched Emily stand at the altar with Tom, her heart heavy with doubt, Linda thought about all the times she had tried to get to know Emily better. There had always been something just out of reach, something Emily kept hidden. And now, standing in the church, Linda couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. She had been so eager to accept Emily into their family. But now she wasn't so sure. As the ceremony continued, Linda found herself lost in her thoughts, replaying moments from the past. She had always trusted her instincts, and now those instincts were telling her that something wasn't right. She tried to push the feeling aside, but it wouldn't go away. Was she overthinking things? Was she just being a worried mother? Or was there more to Emily than met the eye? As Linda watched her son and his bride exchange their vows, she realized that she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something Emily was hiding, a secret that could change everything. Linda could no longer sit in silence, watching the ceremony unfold in front of her. Her heart raced as she tried to shake the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. She had always trusted her instincts, and right now, they were screaming at her to do something. Without thinking, she stood up and quietly made her way toward the back of the church, her eyes never leaving Emily, who stood next to Tom, her face calm but her eyes betraying a hint of uncertainty. Linda's thoughts were racing. She needed to speak to Tom. He had to understand. He was about to marry a woman who might not be the person he thought she was, and Linda couldn't let this go on any longer. She walked quickly, her steps steady but full of urgency. She found Tom standing near the entrance of the church, his back to her as he was talking to one of the groomsmen. When he turned around and saw his mother approaching, his smile faded. Linda could see the confusion in his eyes, but there was something else there, too, a hint of frustration, as if he already knew something was wrong. "Mom, what's going on?" Tom asked, his voice low and filled with concern. "Why are you leaving?" Linda could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she pushed forward. She took a deep breath and tried to steady herself. "Tom, I need to talk to you. There's something I need to tell you about Emily. Something that doesn't feel right." Tom looked at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "We're getting married, Mom. Everything's fine." "No, Tom," Linda said, her voice shaking slightly. "It's not fine. There's something about Emily that doesn't add up. I've been watching her. And I think she's hiding something." Tom's face fell, his confusion turning to defensiveness. "Mom, don't start. You've been worried about this since the beginning. But she's a great person. You've seen that for yourself." "I know what I've seen," Linda replied, trying to keep her voice calm, though it trembled with emotion. "But today, something is off. I don't know what it is yet, but I can feel it. You have to trust me on this." Tom was silent for a moment, his eyes looking past her, as if searching for the words to say. He didn't want to believe it. He didn't want to believe that the woman he loved could be hiding anything from him, let alone something that could change everything. But deep down, Linda could tell he was starting to question. He had always trusted his mother's judgment, but he didn't want to admit that maybe, just maybe, Linda was right. "You're asking me to stop the wedding," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Right here, right now, because of what?" "A feeling." Linda nodded, her eyes brimming with concern. "Yes, Tom, because I know something's wrong, and I can't let you go through with this without telling you what I think." Tom stood there, looking torn. The weight of the decision before him felt unbearable. His mind raced. On one hand, his love for Emily, and on the other, his trust in his mother. "I need to talk to her," he said quietly. "I can't just walk away without knowing the truth." Linda's heart sank, but she nodded. "I understand. But please, Tom, don't let your love for her blind you to the truth. If something's wrong, you need to face it before it's too late." Tom turned and walked toward Emily, his mind still swirling with confusion and doubt. Linda stood in the background, her eyes following him. She knew this wasn't over. Whatever Emily was hiding, Tom had to see it for himself. She could only hope that he would listen to his heart and his mother's warnings before it was too late. Tom walked slowly toward Emily, his mind in a whirlwind of confusion and uncertainty. His heart ached, torn between his love for her and the unsettling feeling his mother had planted in his mind. Linda had always been a strong and trustworthy figure in his life, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal. Could it be true? Could Emily, the woman he was about to marry, really be hiding something from him? It didn't seem possible. As he approached Emily, she stood still, a smile on her face that looked almost too perfect. She was beautiful, as always, her eyes bright, her posture graceful. But Tom couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about her today. He had known Emily for over a year, and he had never seen her like this. She was acting strangely, distant even, as if her mind was elsewhere. The way she kept glancing nervously at her hands, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It all made Tom's stomach churn. "Emily," Tom said softly, his voice unsure but steady. "Can we talk for a second?" She turned to face him, her smile flickering for a brief moment before it returned. "Of course, darling. Is everything okay?" Tom hesitated, looking at her closely. He saw the woman he loved, the woman who had been with him through so much. But he also saw something else, the same unease that his mother had noticed earlier. "Mom, she said something to me," Tom began, his voice faltering slightly. "She thinks you're hiding something, and I need to know if there's any truth to that." Emily's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, and Tom could see the slight tension in her shoulders. It was subtle, but it didn't escape him. "What are you talking about?" she asked quickly, her tone a little too defensive. "Why would she say that?" "I don't know," Tom replied, his voice growing more firm. "But I need to know, Emily. If there's something you're not telling me, something important, I have to know before we go any further." For a moment, Emily didn't speak. She looked down at the ground, her fingers twisting nervously at the fabric of her dress. Tom could see the fear in her eyes now, the uncertainty that seemed to take over. It was like the woman he had known so well was slipping away, replaced by someone else, someone hiding behind a mask of perfection. "Tom, Emily began, but then she stopped, taking a deep breath. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you, but I didn't know how." Tom felt his heart tighten as the words hung in the air. This was it. He had been waiting for her to speak, to tell him the truth. But what was it? What had she been hiding? "I'm not who you think I am," Emily continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to hurt you, but I need to be honest now." Tom stared at her, his mind racing, unable to process the words. "What do you mean?" Emily swallowed hard and looked up at him, her eyes filled with both regret and fear. "I've been keeping a secret, something from my past that I've never shared with anyone. It's not something I'm proud of, but it's part of who I am. And I don't know if you can forgive me for it, but I can't marry you without telling you the truth." Tom's heart sank as he stood there, trying to absorb what she was saying. He had known Emily for so long, and yet here she was, revealing a side of herself he hadn't expected. What had she done? What was this secret she was so afraid to share? Before he could ask, Emily continued, her voice softening. "I was involved in something before I met you. It's a part of my life I tried to leave behind, but it's never truly gone. And I didn't want it to come between us. I thought if I kept quiet, we could have a fresh start. But now I see I was wrong." Tom's mind was reeling. The secret was more than he had imagined, and it was clear now that Linda's suspicions weren't just paranoia. There was something serious at play here, something that Tom had no idea about. But what was it? What had Emily been hiding all this time? And most importantly, could he forgive her for keeping it from him, especially on the day of their wedding? The silence between them stretched on, and Tom felt like his world was crumbling. He had thought he knew everything about Emily, but now it felt like everything had been built on a foundation of secrets. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. Tom stood there, his mind a swirl of emotions. Emily's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of something he couldn't yet fully understand. The woman he was about to marry, the woman he had trusted with his heart, was not who he thought she was. The truth, the secret she had kept from him, was slowly beginning to take shape in his mind, but he wasn't ready to accept it. His heart refused to believe that Emily, The woman he had loved and planned his future with could have been hiding something so serious, so profound. "Emily," Tom said, his voice shaking slightly as he tried to find the words. "What is it? What's the secret you're talking about?" Emily took a deep breath, her eyes avoiding his. She fidgeted with the hem of her dress, her fingers trembling. For a moment, she seemed lost in her thoughts, as if gathering the courage to reveal the full extent of the truth. Tom's heart raced, and the uncertainty that had been gnawing at him for days now seemed to fill every corner of his mind. I was involved in a situation before we met." Emily started slowly, her voice faltering. "A situation that I never wanted to share because it was painful. I was in a relationship before, one that didn't end well. It was complicated, and things happened that I never wanted to bring into our lives." Tom's brow furrowed as he tried to make sense of what she was saying. A past relationship. That didn't seem like something that would warrant the secrecy she had built around it. "What kind of situation are you talking about? I don't understand." Emily's gaze met his then, her eyes full of regret and guilt. "It wasn't just a relationship, Tom. It was a whole part of my life that I've tried to bury. I was involved with a group of people who weren't the best influence. I did things that I'm not proud of, things I wish I could take back. I thought I had left that behind me when I met you, but it's still been following me. And I didn't know how to tell you without destroying everything." Tom's chest tightened as he listened to her words. He could feel the sting of betrayal in his heart, but it wasn't just betrayal, it was confusion. He couldn't understand what Emily was saying. She had never shown any signs of being involved with anything or anyone that could be harmful or dangerous. This wasn't the Emily he knew. "Are you telling me that you were involved with dangerous people?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me about this before? Why keep it a secret?" "I was ashamed," Emily whispered, her eyes welling up with tears. "I didn't want you to see me as someone who had made mistakes, who had been foolish. I wanted you to love me for who I am now, not for who I was." Tom felt his heart break as he watched Emily's tears fall. He had never seen her so vulnerable, so broken. He had never imagined that beneath the smile and the charm, there could be so much pain. But what did this mean for them? Could he ever see her the same way again after hearing this truth? Could he trust her when her past was filled with so many secrets? He took a step closer to her, his emotions running wild. "Emily, I don't know what to say. This is a lot for me to take in. You've kept this from me for so long. How am I supposed to trust you now?" Emily looked up at him, her eyes filled with desperation. "Please, Tom. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could leave all of that behind, but it's not something I can erase. I was afraid that if I told you the truth, you'd walk away from me, and I couldn't lose you." Tom stared at her, trying to make sense of everything. His mind was racing, and he could feel his heart breaking in two. He had never imagined that this moment, the moment he was supposed to say his vows and start a new life with the woman he loved, would be the one where everything came crashing down. But there it was, the truth. And now Tom was left to face a decision that could change everything, whether he could forgive Emily and move forward, or whether this secret was too big to overcome. "I need time," Tom finally said, his voice shaky but firm. "I need time to think about this, Emily. I don't know what to do right now." Emily nodded silently, tears streaming down her face. She knew this was the moment that could determine the fate of their relationship. The weight of the truth was heavy on both of them, and for the first time, neither of them knew what would happen next. The silence between them felt suffocating. Tom turned away, his steps slow as he walked a few paces to the side, trying to gather his thoughts. His mind was flooded with so many emotions: shock, confusion, hurt. He had always believed in Emily, trusted her with his heart. And now everything seemed uncertain. The image he had built in his mind of the life they would share together suddenly felt fragile, like it could crumble with just one wrong word. Emily stood still, her hands wringing the fabric of her dress, her heart aching as she watched him. She had never wanted to hurt him. She had never imagined that the truth she had hidden for so long, would drive a wedge between them. But now that it was out, the fear of losing him felt like a heavy weight pressing on her chest. She had feared this moment, the moment when Tom would finally see who she truly was. But more than that, she feared that the man she loved would never look at her the same way again. "Tom," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't mean for this to happen. I swear. I tried so hard to change, to leave that past behind. I thought I could build something real with you, something that wasn't tied to that darkness." Tom didn't turn around. His thoughts were racing, the memories of their time together playing back in his mind like a movie reel. He remembered the first time they met, how she had seemed so perfect, so genuine. They had shared laughter, quiet moments, plans for the future. He had believed that they were meant to be together. But now, the foundation of their relationship felt shaky, as if it had been built on something that wasn't real. "I need time, Emily," Tom repeated, his voice firmer now, though it still carried a hint of sadness. "I need to think about this. I can't just pretend everything is fine when it feels like everything I knew is falling apart." Emily's chest tightened at his words. She had hoped that the truth would set things right, that Tom would understand. But now she wasn't so sure. She didn't know how to fix what had been broken. All she could do was stand there, hoping against hope that Tom would see the woman she was now, not the one she had been before. But she knew that wasn't how things worked. People didn't forget the past that easily. And no matter how much she had changed, it didn't erase the fact that she had kept this secret from him for so long. "I understand," Emily said quietly, tears filling her eyes. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait. I'll wait for you to figure this out, Tom. I need you to know that I love you. I really do." Tom didn't know what to say. The weight of her words, the honesty in her voice, was almost more than he could bear. But he couldn't let his emotions guide him right now. He had to think. He had to figure out if he could move forward with Emily. Knowing what he knew now, could he forgive her? Could he trust her again? He looked at her one last time, his heart heavy. "I need to be alone for a while. I don't know if I can do this right now." He turned and walked away, each step feeling like a mile. Emily stood there, feeling like the world was slipping away from her. She had opened up, laid bare her past, and yet it wasn't enough. She watched Tom walk away, her heart breaking as he left her standing alone at the altar, the future they had planned slipping further and further out of reach. As she stood there, her mind raced with regret, but also a flicker of hope. She had told him the truth. Now, all she could do was wait to see if Tom would come back to her, or if this moment, this secret, would end everything between them. The hours that followed were some of the longest in Tom's life. He had left Emily standing alone at the altar, his mind a whirlwind of confusion, hurt, and disbelief. As he walked through the quiet church hallways, he couldn't escape the image of her face, the tears in her eyes, and the weight of her confession. It was as if everything he had known had been shaken to its core. He needed answers, but even more than that, he needed time. Time to process everything he had just learned, time to figure out what to do next. Tom walked aimlessly for what felt like hours, not sure where he was headed, but knowing that he couldn't face Emily. Not yet. He needed to clear his head, away from the emotions and the shock of what had just happened. The weight of the decision that lay before him felt unbearable. He had always prided himself on being a man who could make decisions, who could face challenges head-on. But now, facing the woman he loved, and her truth, he wasn't so sure. Meanwhile, back at the church, Emily sat quietly, staring at the empty space where Tom had stood moments before. Her mind was racing, but the thoughts were jumbled, incomplete. She had never imagined her confession would cause such a rift between them. She had hoped, desperately hoped, that Tom would understand that the past she had kept hidden was not the woman she was today. She had changed. But did he see that? Or had the weight of her past overshadowed everything? She had wanted to be honest, to finally tell them the truth. But now, as the minutes dragged on, and the silence grew deeper, Emily couldn't help but feel like she had made a mistake. What if he couldn't forgive her? What if this was the end of everything? The doors to the church opened slowly, and Emily looked up, her heart racing. Tom stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, looking at each other, the weight of the unspoken words hanging between them. "I thought you needed time," Emily said softly, her voice trembling. "I thought you needed space. I didn't expect." Tom stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers, but there was a long pause before he spoke. "I've been walking around in circles," he began, his voice quiet but steady, "trying to make sense of everything. What you said, it's hard to process. I won't lie, Emily. It feels like I've been blindsided. But I need you to know, I don't want to lose you." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "You don't?" "No," Tom replied, shaking his head. "I love you. I've always loved you. But this is something I need to think about. It's not just about your past. It's about me understanding who you are now. And understanding if I can truly move forward with that knowledge." Emily nodded slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. "I understand. I've spent so long running from my past, thinking I could outrun it. But the truth is, it's a part of me, and I don't want to hide it from you anymore." Tom reached out then, gently taking her hand in his. "I don't want you to hide anything from me. I just need time to wrap my head around it all. But I can't promise that I'll be okay right away. This is a lot, Emily." She squeezed his hand, a sense of relief washing over her. It wasn't an answer, but it was something. It was the start of a conversation they needed to have. A conversation that could help them understand if they were truly meant to be together despite everything. "I'll wait," Emily said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'll wait for you, Tom. I just want you to know that I'm here, no matter what happens." Tom smiled faintly, the weight of the moment finally starting to lift. "I need to figure this out, and I need you to know that I'm not walking away from us. I don't know where this is going yet." They stood together in the quiet church, the sounds of the world outside slowly returning to focus. It wasn't the perfect wedding they had both imagined, but it was a start, and sometimes that was all they could ask for. As the hours passed, Emily and Tom took the first steps toward healing. The road ahead would be challenging, and there were no guarantees. But one thing was certain: they were both committed to facing the future together, no matter what it held. The truth had been spoken, the silence had been broken, and now they would have to figure out what came next, together.